Teamwork is the ability to work together towards a common vision. It is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. This was said by the famous Scottish-American industrialist who led the enormous expansion of the American steel industry in the late 19th century. He was also one of the highest-profile philanthropists of his era. Mr. Carnegie was the epitome of the American rags-to-riches story. Andrew Carnegie was born in Dunfermline, Scotland on November 25, 1835, in a very small cottage. Not only was it a single-room cottage, but it also had a dirt floor. This little shack of a house was soon too small for his father, William Carnegie, so they moved to a larger home on Edgar Street. Falling on very hard times as a hand-loom weaver in a country in starvation, William Carnegie decided to move his family to America where they could start a better life and make more money by living the American dream. When Carnegie was 13, they moved to the United States. His family had to borrow money to migrate, but once in the U.S., they settled in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. Allegheny was one of the poorest towns in Pennsylvania at the time. Carnegie got his first job at age 13 in 1848 as a bobbin boy, changing threads in a cotton mill 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, with a starting wage of $1.20 a week at the Pittsburgh cotton factory. To provide for their family, Carnegie's father started working in a cotton mill, but later earned money weaving and peddling linens. His mother, Margaret Morrison Carnegie, earned money by binding shoes. In 1850, Carnegie became a telegraph messenger boy in the Pittsburgh's office of the Ohio Telegraph Company. There, he paid close attention to his work and quickly learned how to distinguish the differing sounds of the incoming telegraph signals produced. Soon he was able to translate signals from the telegraph by ear without having to write them down, and was soon promoted as operator. Carnegie's capacity, his willingness to work, his perseverance, and his alertness would inevitably bring forth many opportunities for young Carnegie. Starting in 1853, Thomas A. Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company employed Carnegie as a secretary and telegraph operator. And at age 18, Carnegie began a rapid advancement throughout the company, becoming the superintendent of the Pittsburgh division. His employment by the Pennsylvania Railroad Company would be vital to his later success. The railroads were the first big businesses in America, and Pennsylvania was one of the largest of them all. Carnegie learned much about management and cost control during these years, and from Scott in particular. Scott also helped him with his first investments. Many of these were part of the corruption indulged by Scott and his Pennsylvania's president, J. Edgar Thompson, which consisted of inside trading in companies that the railroads did business with. Before the Civil War, Carnegie arranged a merger between Woodruff's company and George Pullman, the inventor of a sleeping car for first-class travel. The investment was a great success and source of profit for Woodruff and Carnegie. The young Carnegie continued to work for the Pennsylvania's Tom Scott and introduced several improvements in the service. In the spring of 1861, Carnegie was appointed by Scott, who is now Assistant Secretary of War in charge of military transportation, as superintendent of the military railways and the Union government's telegraph lines in the East. Carnegie helped to open the rail lines into Washington, D.C. that the rebels had cut. He rode the locomotive pulling the 1st Brigade of Union troops to reach Washington, D.C. Following the defeat of Union forces at Bull Run, he personally supervised the transportation of the defeated forces. Under his organization, the telegraph service rendered efficient service to the Union cause and significantly assisted in the eventual victory. Defeat of the Confederacy required vast supplies of munitions, as well as railroads and telegraph lines to deliver the goods. The war demonstrated how integral the industries were to American success. In 1864, Carnegie invested $40,000 in Story Farm on Oil Creek in Venango County, Pennsylvania. In 1 year, Carnegie earned over $1 million in profit off of the farm. The demand for iron products made Pittsburgh a center of wartime production. Carnegie worked with others in establishing a steel rolling mill, and steel production and control of industry became the source of his fortune. After the war, Carnegie left the railroads to devote all of his energies to the ironworks trade. Carnegie worked to develop several ironworks, eventually forming the Keystone Bridge Works and the Union Iron Works in Pittsburgh. Although he had left the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, he remained closely connected to its management, especially Thomas A. Scott and J. Edgar Thompson. He used his connection to the two men to acquire contracts for his Keystone Bridge Company and the rails produced by his iron works. When he built his first steel plant, he named it after Thompson. After Carnegie's mother died in 1886, Carnegie married Louise Whitfield, who is more than 20 years younger than Carnegie. In 1897, the couple had their only daughter, whom they named after Carnegie's mother, Margaret. Carnegie made his fortune in the steel industry, controlling the most extensive integrated iron and steel operations ever owned by an individual in the United States. One of his two great innovations was the cheap and efficient mass production of steel by adopting the Bessemer process for steelmaking. Henry Bessemer invented the furnace, which allowed the high carbon content of pig iron to be burnt away in a controlled and rapid way. The steel price dropped as a direct result, and Bessemer steel was rapidly adopted for railway lines and girders for buildings and bridges. The second was in his vertical integration of all suppliers of raw materials. In the late 1880s, Carnegie Steel was the largest manufacturer of pig iron, steel rails, and coke in the world, with a capacity to produce approximately 2,000 tons of pig metal per day. In 1888, Carnegie bought the rival Homestead Steel Works, which included an extensive plant served by tributary coal and iron fields, a long railway, and a line of lake steamships. Carnegie combined his assets and those of his associates in 1892 with the launching of the Carnegie Steel Company. By 1889, the U.S. output of steel exceeded the UK, and Carnegie owned a large part of it. In 1901, Carnegie was 66 years old and considering retirement. He reformed his enterprises into conventional joint stock corporations as preparation to this end. John Pierpont Morgan was a banker and perhaps America's most important financial deal maker. He had observed how efficiently Carnegie produced profit. He envisioned an integrated steel industry that would cut costs, lower prices to consumers, and produce in greater quantities and raise wages to workers. To this end, he needed to buy out Carnegie and several other major producers and integrate them into one company, thereby eliminating duplication and waste. He concluded negotiations on March 2, 1901, and formed the United States Steel Corporation. It was the first corporation in the world with a market capitalization over $1 billion. According to Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth, it was necessary to give back to those less fortunate, and philanthropy was the key to making life worth living. That is exactly what Carnegie did. After he retired, he was sitting on a massive amount of cash, more than he would ever need. He donated this money to people of his hometown by opening a library in his mother's name. He gave $2 million in 1901 to start the Carnegie Institute of Technology at Pittsburgh, and the same amount in 1902 to found the Carnegie Institution at Washington, D.C. He later contributed more to these and other schools. In Scotland, he gave $10 million in 1901 to establish the Carnegie Trust for the Universities of Scotland. Carnegie also established large pension funds in 1901 for his former employees at Homestead and in 1905 for American college professors. His interest in music led him to fund construction of 7,000 church organs. He built and owned Carnegie Hall in New York City. Carnegie was a large benefactor of the Tuskegee Institute under Booker T. Washington for African American education. He helped Washington create the National Negro Business League. Carnegie was honored for his philanthropy and support of the arts by initiation as an honorary member of a fraternity in October 14, 1917 at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, Massachusetts. The fraternity's mission reflects Carnegie's values by developing young men to share their talents to create harmony in the world. Carnegie died on August 11, 1919 in Lenox, Massachusetts of bronchial pneumonia. He had already given away approximately $4.8 billion of his wealth. At his death, his last $30 million was given to foundations, charities, and to pensioners. To some, Carnegie represents the idea of the American dream. He was an immigrant from Scotland who came to America and became successful. He is not only known for his successes, but his enormous amounts of philanthropist works, not only to charities but also to promote democracy and independence to colonized countries.